Huh? Patrick, check it out!
Whoa! Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, with the arrival of Mizutsune in Monster Hunter Wilds with Title Update 1, we've had a couple of very interesting skills added to the game. One of them being a weapon skill that is totally completely new in Slicked Blade, and the other being Bubbly Dance, but as a set bonus for Mizutsune equipment. And because, as tends to be the case in Monster Hunter, the skills are at least somewhat vague, lacking in description of their activation conditions or their actual numbers that they give you, and of course there are interesting interactions for both of these as well. So today let's go over and test everything that you need to know about Slicked Blade and Bubbly Dance, as well as a general breakdown of the quality and value of Mizutsune weapons compared to Artian weapons or other top weapons depending on type, and talk about what's best. Starting off then, let's talk about the weapon skill Slicked Blade. This only comes on Mizutsune weapons, and our only current way to get it is by using a Mizutsune weapon. The fact that it has up to 3 ranks as a skill is theoretically to future-proof the idea of adding in a decoration for this as a weapon skill, as otherwise there's just no reason to have it be more than an on or off thing because it's only on the weapons at the moment. At max ranks, this skill gives you 21% affinity when inflicted with Bubble Blight, and then another 9% affinity if you are wet, and these bonuses apply independently of each other, and they can stack if you have both at the same time. So if you have Bubble Blight and are wet, you get 30% affinity. Contrary to what you might expect, however, having Bubble Blight does not count as making you wet for the sake of this affinity bonus at least, so if you only get Bubble Blight, you will only get the 21%. To count as wet, you need to stand in an actual pool of liquid or a pond or something of that nature, which are really reliable and common on the Scarlet Forest map in zones that you will actively be fighting in all the time. Otherwise, there's the Oasis in the Windward Plains and the river that goes through the massive northeast area. There's the big open zone with the tree in Wyvria that has some watery spots. The oily areas in the oilwell basin all count for this as well. But mostly this is only properly reliable on the forest without some level of shenanigans and purposeful activation. When you step into liquid like this, you will get a notification of Slicked Blade activating, and the wet bonus will stay active for 30 seconds after you exit the water as well. So it stays active as long as you stay in the water, and then for 30 seconds afterwards. This lets you maintain the Slicked Blade buff by just fighting near water and dipping in and out rather than having to fight in the water the entire time. That said, an interesting bonus note is the swimmer meal skill that you can get from custom grilled meals. This gives you 3 bonus raw attack when you are wet, and this actually does activate when you get Bubble Blight. So one of these interactions must be a bug as far as I'm concerned, because it also only requires you to be wet to activate. So if Bubble Blight is supposed to activate swimmer meal, then it should also activate the wet affinity from Slicked Blade. If Bubble Blight isn't supposed to activate the wet affinity from Slicked Blade, then it also shouldn't activate swimmer meal. So to me, this reads as some sort of crossed wires. Maybe somebody thought Bubble Blight should count as wet, somebody else thought otherwise, and they coded it differently to interact with different things. Or it could just be a genuine mistake that will be fixed in the future, one way or the other. However, because you can only get swimmer meal on a grilled meal, which means even with 100% swimmer meal uptime, it would be a 5 attack boost total from the meal, and that would be worse than just having a feast, getting all the other bonuses from a feast, and having 5 bonus raw without requiring you to be wet or bubble blighted consistently. All that to say, if you can maintain the full buff of Slicked Blade, 30% affinity is quite a lot of value, but given it takes weapon skill slots and you are locked to Mizutsune weapons, it makes it a bit of a tougher comparison, especially as to use the weapon skill outside of against Mizutsune itself, which wouldn't be the best choice to have the weapons with because water element on the weapon, but other than that, you would need 4 set Mizutsune armor bonus to give yourself Bubble Blight, because 2 set doesn't let you apply the Bubble Blight to yourself. It only removes major Bubble Blight and increases your evasion while you have minor Bubble Blight. It's the 4 set bonus that you need to then give yourself Bubble Blight purposefully and actively, and this makes it extremely restrictive as a result. Using 4 pieces of Mizutsune armor, pretty much the best that I could get myself was like 5 weakness exploit, full constitution to help with the evade focus, then 3 burst, 3 maximum might, 2 evade window, 1 adrenaline rush, 1 agitator, 1 coalescence, and some filler skills. This is just way less effective of a skill set than a standard gore 4 set setup or even gore 2 set set with some other 2-set matched on top, and so the only way that it could even out is if either the 30% affinity from Slicked Blade was somehow worth more value than the Gore 2-piece and 4-piece bonuses put together, which it just isn't. And even if it was, the wet bonus is only really consistent on one map regardless. All that said, that's the talk about offense and damage, but not everything is about damage by any means. So let's talk about Bubbly Dance as a set bonus in itself. Again, with 2 pieces of the set bonus, this removes major bubble blight so you won't get sliding around uncontrollably, or damage increases when you get hit while you have bubble blight, and it also increases your evade window while you have bubble blight. The 4-set bonus adds the fact that you can cause bubble blight to yourself by rolling multiple times in a row. Specifically to apply bubble blight to yourself, I found it took 3 standard rolls, and you can also apply this with any attack that counts for activating Adrenaline Rush as well, like the back hop for Sword and Shield, that works. Foresight Slash for Longsword works. However, I found these don't activate as much as a standard roll. For example, it takes 4 back hops on Sword and Shield to activate Bubble Blight as opposed to just 3 standard rolls, but it's good to know that these are an option as well. On top of this, these dodge rolls don't have to be consecutive. You can roll 2 times, then wait like 10 seconds, and then when you roll the 3rd time, the buff will activate. Once activated, you will keep Bubble Blight for 30 seconds, or until you get hit by the monster, which will drop the buff off. You cannot refresh the timer of Bubble Blight by evading while you already have it, so this is a timer that you'll have to actively manage and reapply every 30 seconds at minimum if you never get hit to keep the buff active. As for the actual amount of evade window increase it gives you, from my testing from kicking a bunch of innocent toads and then throwing myself at them with various setups, the evade bonus from Bubble Blight with Bubbly Dance seems equivalent to 2 levels of the evade window skill. This is equivalent to the Tumbler Low meal skill. Just like the food skill bonus evade frames though, you cannot overcap on possible number of iframes from a roll. This means you can never surpass the equivalent of evade window 5 as a skill. Evade window 5 is the equivalent to evade window 3 plus Bubbly Dance put together, or to Tumbler Meal High and Bubbly Dance put together, or evade window 1 and Tumbler Meal Low and Bubbly Dance. All of those things even out at evade window 5 in value. But even if you run evade window 5 itself as a skill, and then run Tumbler Meal High and then put Bubbly Dance on top of that, your evade will still have the same amount of iframes as it would as just running evade window 5 as a skill and none of the other stuff, because that is the largest amount of iframes the game will allow you to have. In fact, as awkward as it is, I generally recommend trying to hit the equivalent of evade window 5 before even counting the Bubbly Dance bonus frames when playing with this, for the purpose of keeping Slicked Blade active. Because if some of your evade iframes come from the Bubble Blight itself, you'll be missing them when you're trying to reapply Bubble Blight once every 30 seconds or so. Whereas if you always have all of the iframes, it's a bit easier to reapply the Bubble Blight and just roll on repeat going through attacks and keep uptime on Slicked Blade itself. So realistically, especially with it requiring a full 4-set bonus on a not bad but not great set as far as the offensive skill potential, I view Bubbly Dance as a set bonus being more an enabler for Slicked Blade than anything else. Otherwise, it's just a fun flavor skill. If it was worth more than 2 evade window, then maybe it would be good, or if it could stack past the standard iframe cap, that could be quite fun, but it's relatively low impact as it stands right now. One quick bonus note is that there is some potential for this maybe in the future if we get more ways to work some of the skills together, if we get new sets that have the same skills, or if element for weapons in general just gets stronger, as Bubble Blight dropping off of you counts as activating Coalescence as a skill, and Bubble Blight being active counts as activating the Resuscitate group bonus. Bubble Blight lets you have super high uptime on both of these skills, which are quite good, at least in theory, but that's not much of a thing right now, at least because you can't use Resuscitate and Bubbly Dance together, and because Coalescence just isn't that used right now in general, aside from things like elemental bowgun builds, which won't be using Slicked Blade. Now that we've gone over that, it's time to compare the weapons to Artian weapons, because there are various ways that you can do this, but the previous context is all very important. A standard Artian melee weapon with perfect rolls, depending on weapon type, will either be 4 attack reinforcements and 1 sharpness, or 3 attack, 2 sharpness. And then for ranged weapons, you want some capacity boost for the bowguns, and honestly just pure 5 attack reinforcements for bow. That said, for the sake of general comparisons, we'll be using a 4 attack reinforcement Artian melee weapon. This means 225 attack, 5% base affinity, and white sharpness, and then whatever element or status you choose to attach. Base crit damage is a 25% bonus compared to a regular hit. 5% chance at that means a 1.25% average damage increase throughout a hunt, so we increase the 225 attack by that amount. We then multiply by 1.32 to count for white sharpness, for a total of 300.7 effective raw as a weapon by itself. In comparison, a Mizutsune weapon is 210 attack, 15% affinity, white sharpness, and then water element. 15% chance of a 25% damage increase is a 3.75% average damage increase. Then add in the white sharpness modifier and you get 287.6 effective raw. This means, in a vacuum, with just these two numbers, Mizutsune weapons are around 3.4% weaker than a perfect Artian weapon, which isn't a massive amount. However, there are other factors to consider that make it a bit worse. Using a Mizutsune weapon properly would mean taking advantage of the skill Slicked Blade, which means using a much weaker offensive armor set than you can get away with for an Artian weapon. But for the sake of equal comparisons, let's say you aren't using Mizutsune set. Artian weapon then needs to account for the 2 crit boost, as that's what most weapons would use in the decoration slots you would gain from an Artian weapon over just using the Mizutsune weapon. So let's redo the Artian weapon with a 31% critical damage boost potential instead of only 25% boost from crits. This ends up putting us at 301.6 effective raw, very slight further bonus, but this only gets further and further apart when you count affinity from the armor skills too, as the critical boost creates a larger gap when you do. The raw attack is much higher on the Artian, which also gives it a larger base number to multiply with your critical hits anyways. So on paper, this is now a 4.7% damage difference between the two, but it grows larger and larger with the actual armor sets considered and involved. That said, for the sake of it, let's also go over how Mizutsune weapons look with Slicked Blade active. A reminder that with base stats, a Mizutsune weapon is 287.6 effective raw. If we then count it as 36% affinity instead of 15%, which would be having Bubble Blight on with Slicked Blade but not being wet, this pushes it to 302.1 effective raw, which actually places it above the perfect Artian when looked at in a vacuum. Then if we count both Bubble Blight and wet active with Slicked Blade at the same time, it will put it up instead to 308.4, a decent chunk above the Artian weapon. But that doesn't at all account for 2 major things. To activate Slicked Blade, you either need to be fighting Mizutsune, which means that you're using water element against a non-water weak monster, which is already a damage loss, or you need to be using Mizutsune Forcep, the Bubbly dance, to put Bubble Blight on yourself, which means not having the same kind of offensive skill potential an Artian weapon can get from the armor set, not using that set bonus. Past this, a big thing to understand about the skill split in Wilds and the way that weapon and armor decorations work separately, the way that the skill system is that because crit boost is a weapon decoration, trading critical boost for crit chance on your weapon slots is generally a really bad idea, which you are forced to do if you go from Artian to Mizutsune, because Slicked Blade is about crit chance. This is because it's easy to get affinity from your armor skills, and you can hit 100% affinity without any investment from your weapon, so crit boost is essentially an extra 3% damage per rank if you have full affinity. This means losing any critical boost to gain crit chance on your weapon, the crit chance that could have been gotten elsewhere, is a very bad trade. All of this to say, for the most part, Mizutsune weapons are a fair amount weaker than Artian weapons, but you probably already knew that. As for how much weaker, that's quite variable depending on how you plan to use it, whether just being the Mizutsune weapon in general with a normal armor set, or using it with the Mizutsune Forcep bonus, but I'd say in general you're looking at a 10 to 15% damage increase from using a perfectly rolled Artian weapon in a meta damage armor set to use a Mizutsune weapon with Bubbly Dance. If that is worth it for you to use the Mizutsune stuff, there's no problem with that, but it's definitely good to be aware of. That said, while this applies to almost every melee weapon, the hunting horn specifically is a very specific exception, as elemental hunting horn is more or less the way to go for pure damage meta for that weapon because of how the sound wave attacks work and their high element motion values, and the Mizutsune hunting horn is better than the other water hunting horns that we have access to right now, which means that at least one Mizutsune weapon is meta in a specific setup, which is water hunting horn. As for ranged weapons, the bowguns are both water and pierce based, but are worse for pierce than the pierce focused bowguns, and worse for water than an element built Artian weapon, which also has pierce as a backup. So they're solid out of the box weapons, but they aren't the best at any of the things that they do, especially because bowguns have a really high sort of tax for skills. They need those 3-slot decorations that you can get from other bowguns that Mizutsune doesn't really give them the space for. For bow, Mizutsune is an interesting one, as it has pierce coating and exhaust coating, which also lets you get stuns on the monster too if you hit the head, but it's far more interesting than it is competitive, as close range coding is pretty much the requirement, the go-to for bow when looking for high damage, and this bow just doesn't have that. And that just about does it for today then, everyone. A deeper dive into Slicked Blade as a weapon skill, and then Bubbly Dance as a set bonus. Overall, I think the big miss here is making you require 4-set Mizutsune armor for Bubbly Dance, as if it was only 2-set bonus, you could definitely make some arguments for 2-set, giving Bubbly Dance and activating Slicked Blade, and that would make it somewhat equivalent to the Gore 2-set, but 4 pieces of this armor set required to activate Bubbly Dance is just way too much investment to be comparable to a proper meta setup. It's a great little fun armor set, don't get me wrong, having Bubbly Blade is enjoyable, and it's another route to bonus evade frames, which is neat, and thematically the whole setup is very cool. But if you want a statistical comparison, it's just nowhere close to the actual meta damage setup, so it totally depends on what you value as a player. I hope you've all enjoyed this, and let me know your own thoughts on any of this in the comments down below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.